Now, descriptors can be quite tricky to develop, but you'll find the first time you do it, it's difficult, but it becomes easier and easier. And the best part is if you do it correctly the first time, you can reuse the descriptors over and over again for tasks. Right, now let's have a look at the characteristics of descriptors before we look at how we actually determine them. Well, the first thing is to make sure that each criteria has its own set of descriptors. This is essential because you need to use these as the basis to assess the learner. Each descriptor should also provide a clear guideline on how to evaluate the level of performance and understanding of the learner for each criterion. You want each descriptor to be clearly defined, and you want to make sure they're measurable. Remember, you've got to allocate an assessment mark or standard according to each of these descriptors, so it has to be measurable. Most importantly, your descriptors should measure quality and not quantity, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, but make sure that each level evaluates or measures a different quality. Each level should indicate a different cognitive ability. So your cognitive abilities should increase from level 1 up to level 5, and they should be standalone so that you can actually see the difference between each level, and also, importantly, to be able to see progression from one level to the next. You can repeat descriptors where necessary, but for more than one criterion, not for different levels. So in other words, if you've got two different criterions, you might want to use the similar or the same descriptors, but each level has to be different. So what's important to remember and to understand is the descriptors indicate where a learner went wrong and where they can improve. So when you're looking at descriptors, they've got to be explained clearly for both you as the assessor or for your other colleagues who might be assessing, but also for the learner. So if you have a look at this level 3 here, and remember the criterion here we're looking for is providing a factual account of a leader. Here, the level 3, and remember we said that was the most important level, the can and can't do level. The learner, if they are able to take factual information and link it in a logical sequence and suitably link the one fact to the next, then in terms of this criterion, they're on a can and can't do level. Now have a look at level 5, which is extension. Here, the difference between level 3 and level 5 is here, they can obviously achieve level 3 and what's required, but they can also take original examples and ideas used, and they link facts to create a better understanding of the content and factual information. Do you see the difference between those two levels? And it's very important that each level is different. Level 1, on the other hand, is they can identify a number of factual aspects, but there's no link between them. So here the learner's just literally written down a whole lot of facts. So now let's have a look at the important things that we must remember about these descriptors. Well, the first is where they come from. They come from the levels or the headings, and they provide an understanding of the content so the learner will be able to show at each level. They also demonstrate skills. So it's not just facts. Each of those, and remember we said it's got to measure quality. So each level has to be based on skills and the quality to which the learner is able to understand or show understanding at each level. So now how do we determine descriptors? Well, we're going to go through a 4-step process just to show you how to determine these actual descriptors. So the first step is you look at your predetermined and appropriate levels. So in other words, you've got to make sure you've got levels or predetermined levels and appropriate, and that they are appropriate. So here there's the column headings, and remember in the previous video we looked at how to look at the levels, and that's why it's so important to have the levels based on a taxonomy. So here we've got 5 levels, starting with knowledge and factual level. Then we've got application of knowledge, where they're able to make basic and logical simple connections. The level 3, and remember it's the can and can't do level, where the learner is able to carry out the skill. Level 4 is the application of the skill. So you see how we're moving from knowledge into skills. The learner is able to apply the skill to various contexts, and then level 5 is extension, where the learner is able to draw new and logical conclusions. So remember, those are the general level headings that we've taken in this case, and I've tried to use different examples. So this is a different taxonomy now. It's not Bloom's, but you can see a bit of Bloom's coming through in the different stages. The second thing we need to look at and make sure that we've got predetermined and appropriate criteria. So where do we have the criteria from? Remember, right in the beginning, we did our task expectation, and from our task expectation, we got criteria. So those are your row headings. And in this case, the example we're using is providing a factual account of a leader. So that was one of the criterion. And remember, when you're developing a rubric, you're going to have a number of criterion down the side. Right, then level 3, or the third thing that we need to be able to do, is we need to study the criteria and determine the expected response for each of these levels. So now we've got to look at the criteria and say, well, okay, we've got these different levels. What do we expect from the learner when they're providing a factual account of the leader on the different levels? And remember, we said you must start on level 3, which is the can and can't do level. So what does the curriculum require the learner to do? Well, here we want factual information linked in a logical sequence and suitably linked to one another. So we don't just want them to have the facts, we want them to be able to do something with it. From level 3, we go to level 4 and level 5, and you'll see how they progress. It's not a repeat of the same thing, but they should be able to, if they can do level 4, it means they can do level 3 and level 4. So it's a building on the level before. Then once we've done that, we go down to level 1 and level 2, and we write in the description there of each of those expectations from the learners being able to provide factual account of a leader. Right, step 4. And this is really important. We spoke about the bell curve in the previous video when we were looking at the levels. Here we need to use the bell curve to check for progression of skills and cognition. So we've got to ask ourselves, look at the rubric and look at our descriptors. You can see with that bell curve, most of the learners should be able to function or should achieve level 3. Less of them level 4 and 5, and less level 1 and 2. If your bell curve sits where the majority of the learners are sitting on level 4 or 5, there is something wrong with your rubric. And a lot of teachers argue with me and say, no, but we want them to achieve the highest. Yes, of course you want to achieve the highest. But you're not pushing your learners. You're not trying to extend them. You're not doing them any favors if you're always marking on level 5 and all of them actually achieve level 5. So remember, the part of developing a rubric is a developmental process for the learners. Once you've done step 4, you've then created a rubric with descriptors that you know you can assess each criterion with. What do we have to remember? Well, remember that descriptors are what determines the level or work, skills, and application for each criterion. So it's essential to get it right. And then the descriptors at the highest level should show the learner what is possible and to motivate them to achieve this. And this is such an effective tool, because if the learners are able to do a task and then take their rubric home and see how could they have achieved a higher level, hopefully next time they do the task, they've got a bit more insight of what's expected of them.